And you need to just hit on "Got It" on the front of your screen. Well, Rosalie is our special guest tonight, and we're going to get to know her a little bit better. And as I said before, we have a couple guests from Martha Franks with us tonight. And I think the rest of you are all regulars, and I appreciate your faithfulness to page turners. Looking ahead, we have in December on the 5th, The Speckled Monster by Jennifer Carell. It's the historical tale of battling smallpox, and Linda will be leading that one. And then we'll be having a luncheon at the Baptist Nursing Fellowship Summit in Jackson. So I hope you're all thinking about going. I booked my ticket. There's a seat empty next to me. So come on. And at that luncheon, we'll select the books for the remainder of 2024. We'll be starting in 2024 in February with John Ortberg's book, The Life You've Always Wanted, Spiritual Discipleship for Ordinary People. Not that I think you're all ordinary. I think you're rather extraordinary women, actually. But I think that will be very good for us. Linda's going to bring a short devotional and open us in prayer.
These last few days, I've been reading through the book of Exodus. In the study Bible I'm using, it had a short note on this one passage, and the Lord kept bringing it back to my mind. So I want to share it and just share some thoughts. This is from Exodus chapter 15. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. Then he, the Lord, made for them a statute and regulation, and there he rested them. And he said, "If you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I put none of the diseases on you which I had put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." They then came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters. Now, this was taking place. They had crossed the Red Sea. They'd seen God take care of the army of Pharaoh. We have read through the song that Moses sang and led the Israelites in singing, and we see Miriam rejoicing with the women and the tamarines and dancing. And then Moses leads them 3 more days in, but when they got there, they couldn't find water. And then when they did find water, it wasn't drinkable. It wasn't potable. It was bitter. And so, of course, as Israelites normally do, and like we normally do, they started complaining. And Moses then just cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood or a tree and throw it in the water, and became sweet. And this could sort of be a parallel many times where we get into situations. We may have seen the Lord work in our life. We may have seen him really taking those steps that we need and showing us where we need to go and what we need to do. But then we get to this one place and we're just frustrated. We may be maybe angry even because everything's not going right. And you don't know what to do. And we become a little bit like the children of Israel, and we start complaining, why is this happening? Why are these circumstances so bad? And we forget what the Lord had already done. I mean, they had seen how he protected them during the plagues. I mean, their whole area was never affected in some of the plagues. How he protected them as they left, how he provided for them financially. I mean, they went to their neighbors and gathered goals and essentially plundered all of Egypt, but they still couldn't remember that. They were just frustrated that there was no water. It's not like what I thought it would be. And they were just grumbling. And so Moses, being obedient, he put the wood in the water and the water became sweet. But we can look at it. Why didn't God let them go on? Because if they had gone on to Elam, there would have been 12 springs, but he kept them there. And sometimes we may look at, why doesn't God change my circumstances? Why can't I just move on? And we have to sometimes stop and realize he's trying to teach us something during that time. And it may not be easy to learn. And just like he was trying, to me, what he was trying to teach the children of Israel, look, I've taken care of you and I will continue to take care of you. I'm not going to do to you what I did to the Egyptians, because I am your healer. I will heal your diseases. And then when they finished that, they moved on and they got to Elam. And there they had 12 springs, all the date palms. It was a perfect place just to stop and to rest. And they did. But just think back to maybe sometimes in your own life where you maybe just a little complaining about, why can't I move on? Or where you feel like God may be saying, okay, I need to go to this other place. Maybe he's wanting you to transfer to another location. I remember back in the mid-90s, I was traveling from Davao, which is about a 45-minute flight up to Cebu to supervise some work up in that area. And remember one time going back to the airport, and I looked out and I said, I do not like Cebu. Well, this was mid-90s. About the late 90s, I was living in Cebu. So sometimes he moves us from that place, but sometimes he lets us stay in that place. And sometimes he has us in a place that we may not really like, but he's still working either through us for some reason, or he's using us to make a change in the areas that we're in. And just remembering, like he said, the statute he gave the children of Israel, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord, your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians. For I, the Lord, am your healer. And I think he was just trying to show to the Israelites, I am your healer. My relation to you is different from the relationship you saw with the Egyptians. I will be there for you. I will heal you. And then he led them to the 12 springs and the date palms and the little oasis where they could rest. I think sometimes, at least for me, I need to remember to rest in him for him to be able to guide me and lead me to the next step, wherever that might be. So let's pray. Father, we do thank you that we can come to you as Father. And we just thank you how, even our own lives, we can look back and see how you have been at work and how sometimes we forget that you're still working in our lives. But we also thank you for your word, your scriptures that show us how you worked in the lives of the people that you've called out, how you worked in Moses' life, Aaron's and Miriam's, and how you worked in the lives of all the Israelites. Father, help us to continue to rely on you and seek your direction as we move, whether it's within our family, within our career, within our church, or even within the BNF, that we would look to you for that direction and be willing to hear you and move in the direction you want us to move, and not just in the direction we think we should move. And Father, we just ask that as we look at the life of Townsend's, that we will see how you worked in her life and you can continue to work in our lives. We pray this in your son's holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Linda. There's probably no one better to describe Hepzibah Jenkins Townsend and the world that she grew up in and her mission's heart than the researcher and biographer, Rosalie Hunt. And how many of you have met Rosalie in the past and heard her speak? That's almost everybody. All right. Well, Rosalie Hunt is a passionate student of history. I've been with her on some of those historical sites, and she gets more excited than you can even imagine. She has been focusing on the leading women who've shaped missions even before there was a WMU. She brings Baptist history alive, and don't we love it? How many of you have read some of her other books?
No, I don't know. Can't remember.
Well, if this is your first, I'm pretty sure this will not be your last, because she just makes those characters come alive. She's also done some rather inspiring monologues. Some of you have heard her and seen her do that. One time I had to do it with her. I'll tell you that she's not an easy act to follow, but such fun doing that together, Rosalie. And so she has done monologues on Lottie Moon, Hepzibah Jenkins Townsend, Kathleen Mallory, and Ann Judson. Well, Rosalie has a lot of credibility because she grew up on the mission field. Her parents were missionaries in China, and she and her husband Bob served for 30 years as missionaries in Asian countries, 8. So she knows about moving around a bit, and that includes China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Myanmar. Rosalie and I served together at National WMU. Such a treat to work together as officers of National WMU. And I'll tell you, her minutes of the meetings were very detailed, as you can imagine. Nothing was left out, and how much that's appreciated, because sometimes you have to look back and there are legal documents. So always appreciated that, Rosalie. Rosalie also has a master's degree in English, counseling, and speech. And her books include The Extraordinary Life of Anne Hazeltine Judson, A Life Beyond Boundaries, Bless God and Take Courage, The Judson History and Legacy. We've a story to tell, 125 years of WMU and Her Way, the remarkable story of that we have just read. And then there's Lottie Moon and the Silent Bell, the Blue Enamel Cup, and most recently, I think, is the 6 Yellow Balloons. Isn't that the most recent one?
Turn around.
Oh, turn it around.
Then
The Silent Bell.
here's the cup.
There's the cup. Okay, so the Blue Enamel Cup is the most recent one. We're so thankful that you could be with us. And maybe there are things you would like to tell us about your research and how God led you to research Hepzibah.
Hepzibah was actually born out of the WMU history. When Wanda Lee in 2011 asked me to write a history, because every 25 years we have had a WMU history, starting with Fannie Heck, then Ethelene Boone Cox, Alma Hunt, Catherine Allen did that wonderful thick volume, terrific research that she did, which gave the basis for all the other research. And then for 125, I did a story form of our women, rather like short stories. And that's when I really got interested in Hepzibah. I had heard the name, but it's just a difficult name to pronounce. It didn't mean much to me. And then I want to find out about this lady. And I had to research all the people for Weave a Story. And Hepzibah was one of those. She was the first. She started us really in 1810. So the fun part of writing is not writing. And a lot of you are writers, you know that. The fun part's the research. And Debbie, you are right. I love archivists and things. Bob says I love him so much because he gets older all the time. He will be 90 in 2 months. So he is he's pushing it up there. Well, when I read about Hepzibah, I want to know more about her. Now, some of my books are written at the request of somebody. Some of them I felt compelled to write. That was true of Ann and Adoniram Judson, the very first book, Bless God and Take Courage, which is the beginning for Baptists. And then I did the WMU history, and that's when I fell in love with Hepzibah. And you know what a sacrifice it is to have to do research in Charleston. I mean, that's just really rough. But I made the sacrifice. I loved it. Oh, my mother's grandmother, my great grandmother, was born on James Island, and she had to evacuate when Fort Sumter was fired on. The first shot, by the way, was my third great uncle who fired that shot. Not really proud to be for your family history, but I just tossed that in for you South Carolinians.
We're proud that you have that connection.
So I went to Charleston, went to the Historical Society, went to the College of Charleston, went to Furman University Library, and of course I went to Edisto. And ladies, if you want to do a Baptist pilgrimage, go to Edisto Island. Oh my goodness. And Hepzibah's fingerprints are all over the place. She is a legend down there. This is the only book I have written that is exoteric. Most of them are Baptist, but she's Baptist, but she's gone beyond that. And the bookstore on Edisto Island and the museum have ordered hundreds of books since 2016 when I wrote the book. And I've been there a number of times, been to the church a number of times, and have found it absolutely fascinating. And of course, when you live as long as I do, you've got a lot of ancestors you found. And I discovered Botany Bay, which was her property. That's where she had the Bleak Hall and that wonderful 4,700 acres of cotton. Botany Bay is where the first salt merchant, William Mellenchamp, was in the late 1600s. And he is my ninth great grandfather. Not a very proud history. I think he was in debtor's prison for a while, but he's very much tied. The Mellenchamp is his name, William Mellenchamp. And then the more I researched, the more I realized First Baptist Church Charleston, which was Hepzibah's church, and you've read how she determined she was to be a Baptist and go to the church and then establish a church. Richard Furman is my fifth great uncle. So, and the founder of that church, William Screven, is another ninth great grandfather. So I feel very, very close to South Carolina and our Baptist beginnings. And Hepzibah's, two of her daughters, of course, you know, she had 14 children, and two of the daughters were very close to her and part of the church in Charleston. And they were very dear friends of two of Richard Furman's daughters. And they did some finishing school and other things together. So she had a husband who was a Presbyterian, a father who was an Episcopalian, and she said, I have Baptist leanings. Boy, did she lean. And she met Luther Rice and the way God brought all things together in the beginning of Baptist missions. And that little society, I was so thrilled when I discovered that little society was the first one to give any money to Ann and Adoniram Judson when Baptist became a denomination in 1814. I think that offering was like $44 and maybe 50 cents. And they had made the first offering to the Charleston Association in 1811 after they started. Now, women didn't have jobs in those days. And I had to admire Hepzibah. That was a woman with intestinal fortitude. If you've read the book, you know how determined she was. And as she thought and lived, when you marry and everything goes over to your husband's control. And she said lots of young women were fine with that. I was not one of them. And she was not. And I love the fact that she got so upset at him because he would not give her money, which had been her money, for missions. And then he ended up writing a will, giving everything to the oldest son, John Ferrers. She moved out of the house.
Yeah.
Obviously, she had to do that. Her brother had left her his property, shareholds, and she, of course, had help, and the servants constructed the house. But I thought it was so interesting that 2 of the 14 children were born while she had moved out of the house. So I didn't explore that in the book, but evidently they kept up their relationship.
Yeah,
But
he did.
finally relented. And she put it very nicely, of course. Uh, he saw the light. She didn't put it that way either, but she moved back in when he changed his will and included all of the children. And because of her determination, that church was built. How many of you visited it?
I did. I
You
have.
had
Mhm.
anybody else? Debbie, you had
Yes.
I haven't been there yet, no.
oh, you
Oh, no, that's one of the things I did when I went to Charleston.
oh yes, perfect. Yeah, you don't have to take a boat there now. You can ride on the road.
Right.
Oh, that's a wonderful spot. You will love it. Take the book with you and use it as a guide to see all the Hepzibah spots.
Yeah.
She was one more fantastic lady. And one of the fun things about research is that I get to meet relatives and descendants. And 3 of Hepzibah's descendants I met in person, face to face. And a number of others I met on the phone. Well, if you've got 14 children, now only 8 of them live to adulthood. But if you've got that many kids, you've got lots of descendants. And she has lots of descendants. And they're proud of the fact that Hepzibah belonged to them. And Lish Thompson, who I don't know if she still is or not, was one of the curators, the archivists at the Charleston County Museum. And the picture on the front of the book, Bleak Hall, is a painting that hangs in her house, in her living room. And she gave me permission to use it on the book. And the year the book came out, I did a Hepzibah monologue. I don't think we were in Charleston that year. I think we were in, I don't know if we were, maybe we were in Florence. Anyway, one of the larger churches, and I did the Hepzibah monologue. And Lori Register had gingerbread there for everybody who was there, which is a perfect touch when they left.
Well, we're going to discuss a few things, Rosalie, so we want you to jump in with those. And
I'll stop and you go ahead and let me.
no, we want to hear from you, but I do want to have let everyone have a few opportunities here. And I just wondered how you all were impressed by how God prepared Hepzibah, despite the setting of her birth and her early years. I mean, the book starts off with a bang, with her birth and the crisis that the world, the country was in. So how did you all see God's hand in all that? You'll have to unmute to speak.
How about just the protection that was on her as they traveled back home? And that was not an easy trip.
At night in the and hiding in the foliage along the side of the river, that must have been awful with a newborn baby. And you know, can you all imagine taking your newborn baby out into a canoe type of I don't know if it was a canoe or like a john boat or something small, anyways, like a dinghy probably, and doing that, how hard that would be. Hepzibah early on, I think because of her relationship with Mom Jean, recognized the injustice of slavery. What do you think contributed to her passion about abolishing slavery?
It
Rosalie,
seemed to me that she grew up always knowing that Mom Jean and the other people who were around her were a different color, but that made no difference. They loved her and she loved them. And so she saw no difference between people, which was a wonderful gift that God gave her to be able to see people as people and to see how God could use all people. I thought that was a beautiful lesson that she received and was able to share it with so many other people.
She did.
Even in the churches, you know, apparently even it was not usual for the churches to see people as people, but in the church that she helped to establish, all people were seen alike and were able to share and to use the talents God had given them.
Rosalie, you wrote that whenever Hepzibah saw some act of callous cruelty, The determination in her heart to do something about such injustice grew apace. And it seemed that it was not only what she experienced on other places, but through her knowledge of what was happening in the world. And her plantation with her family was unique in the loving care of their slaves. Not that they had, I mean, they still lived in reduced circumstances, but they weren't brutalized like on some plantations. But it was interesting. I think it's wonderful that the opinions of people were brought in, and I think when you grow up with a social the social mores that in another place aren't seen as normal, but then someplace else they are seen as normal. And so those kind of injustices come sometimes later in life to people when they suddenly realize that, when I think they understand their own frailties in those ways. So I appreciated that being a part of it. Mom Jean was a central figure in Hepzibah's life. Did you meet any of Mom Jean's relatives at all, Rosalie?
I tried to. I went to several homes in Pettisco community, and they were reluctant to talk. Of course, they didn't know me, and I was a stranger from outside. I tried to find some, and I wanted to find a trace from Mom Bella's family, and I didn't, because she was, Hepzibah said, she's the real gingerbread lady. She made all this possible. She loved her very dearly. And Hepzibah was upset. Her oldest son, John Ferris, was a secessionist.
Right.
Well, those were the mores of that time, and she she was the one that was different. But some of her children picked up on it, obviously, because of the difference in her life. And one of the three characteristics, and most people, most women in that era, we don't know about. They're not written about. So it's unusual to have anything, but we have those three things of her: her quiet dignity, her force of character, sense of justice. She was known for those things. And she's the only white person buried there to this day.
Really?
In that cemetery.
Well, when to take a stand as a Christian on certain things, I think is important. And even in families, we'll have differences of opinions. I know I have three siblings, and we don't all agree on the same things from a spiritual perspective. And that can create some problems. So we have to agree to disagree. And there seems like there was a lot of that as people became aware of things that they felt weren't right as they studied scripture and felt God leading them to be active in that. One of the things that she did was she journaled about slavery too. Those of us who love to journal our thoughts, it was interesting to read what she wrote and said, I do suspect that God plants yearnings in us that we will at least try to change the course of things, at least try. Even though as a woman, she felt, and you put it so well, under the rule of men. And, that's not far different than it was for Jewish people, and still is in some respects. And there are many places in the world where women are considered less than. And I think we're very fortunate in the United States. There are still some inequities when you start looking at things like salaries and the glass ceiling and all of that. But in that day and time, boy, just go back and start knitting was instead of doing all the things that Hepzibah felt called to do and to help others do too. Although she lived on an island and there was no Baptist church, and she only was in Charleston from time to time, what do you think contributed to her early spiritual development and this budding interest in missions when it was not the norm for women to be interested in missions around the world?
It wasn't even the norm for men to be interested in missions at that time.
That's true, yes. But I think that, wasn't it at First Baptist that Dr. Furman started a missions discipleship for adults and children there? He wanted them to know because he had a heart for the nations as well. And
And
then,
he had invited Luther Rice to come
yes,
and speak to the people.
yes. Rosalie and I have been to Luther Rice House in Northborough. I spent a lot of time there when I lived in New England. And we went to the Haystack Meeting Place together out in Western Massachusetts. And so, and William Screven came from my neck of the woods. He was right across the water from our church, which was Screven Memorial in New Hampshire.
That's
And I actually
wonderful.
worked in Kittery, where William Screven was from.
She met missionaries through the First Baptist Church in Charleston. When you meet missionaries and you begin to hear the need, you get on board. You want to help. You want to pray. You want to give. So it was a normal procession once she started meeting some of the missionaries.
Yes. And wasn't it like a light bulb went off in her head when she heard about the Boston Mite Society?
Mhm.
Very cool, huh?
Mhm.
Think
Yeah.
about that. And they even wanted to call themselves a Mites Society. We don't even use that word mite anymore, do we? But it's doing what they could do. And that's what they said. We'll do what we can do. There were many restraints on them. And haven't we all experienced restraints? We've wanted to start something in our churches and we've received pushback.
Yeah.
We've wanted to go on a trip, but resources haven't been there and no one to really help us. But we do what we can do. And that's all that God asks of us, is that. And he often opens the doorway for more. Let's think about her young married life. How many of you would have wanted to get married at 15? I know she was mature for her years, but really,
Yeah.
that's got to be hard. And a man a bit older than her. What, any of you married to an older man? Mine's 5 years older. And so, yeah. So, and that's not all bad, but that was that was what they call a December, June romance.
21 years, I believe.
21 years. That's a whole generation of
Mhm.
I wonder sometimes what his story would be about marrying somebody so young. Yes, cute and obviously quite fertile. So, and willing. So that's a lot of children.
Yeah.
And, we don't see the big families today like we did then. And I remember my grandmother was one of 13. Her brother had 15 children. But we don't see that as much today, though I think we're starting to see a little bit larger families. As I look at the pictures of our missionary families, I'm beginning to see 4 and 5 and 6 children. So I think, everything comes around. But that was interesting. But all those children and 8 survived. Rosalie, you wrote really well of the sorrow that she faced and how that just, how many of you shed a tear or two as she lost those children? And as nurses, we know that many of those things could have been prevented or cured.
If you visit Edisto Island, find the cemetery. They probably know at the museum now how to tell you to get there. Sort of taken care of, sort of not. It's sort of rugged, but just stand and look at those little graves and think of that many losing those babies. Most of them were very small, a few old, really rough.
Yeah, and then losing her son in the horse riding accident. And just she knew sorrow at every level.
And
Maybe one of the things that I noticed was that throughout her life, Rosalie kept pointing out that she was asking God, what do you want me to do? given where I am in this life and the
Mhm.
restrictions that are there, what can I do as a woman? And so God answered her prayer, even through the sadness she felt. It gave her a heart of compassion for other people.
Did. Yes. You know, it's I think it would have been hard for me as a woman to be willing to keep having child after child, knowing that they could be lost.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
I've held those babies that have died as a nurse, as some of you have. I've seen those babies that are born and can't live and don't live, even in today's world. So it's just it was just a sad part of it. There were many joys of this book, and there were many sorrows. And isn't that true of life? We all look back as we've been married long years and remember those times we cried together and those times that we rejoiced together. She talks about, just pick up the page here, what she called soul hunger. I thought that was a beautiful term you chose. She said, Hepzibah was becoming increasingly conscious of a persistent spiritual longing. The Sunday service messages at First Baptist seemed to consistently address the unspoken needs of her aching heart. Her need was difficult to articulate, for sometimes the soul knows for certain only that it is hungry. That's very real. If you have ever been in a church where the gospel's not being preached, you don't hear the pages of the Bibles moving as people look up. They're not carrying the Bible even. And I know today we have devices and all, but still there's something about hearing the sounds of pages turning. There's something about hearing the gospel preached in an in-depth way that always points to Jesus and points to salvation. Any of you ever been in a place like that where your soul was just hungry? I know that some of our missionaries in places where there's not been fellowship and they're the only ones there and their worship is just them and their children. That's hard. And there becomes a soul hunger there. Any thoughts on that?
You know, so much in that time, we don't have a record. We don't know the conversations. We don't know her relatives and influences. But from all I could put together, she had some relatives in the Baptist church in Charleston, and they must have been reflective of genuine spiritual life because they influenced her more than she felt in the Episcopalian church, more than she felt in the Presbyterian church with her husband. She would visit occasionally, but she did not feel the spiritual presence in those places. I think that's why she had Baptist leanings. What was real there.
Well, and we've seen that in others that were of a denomination, even going out as missionaries and leaving as Congregationalists and arriving back as Baptists, haven't we, Rosalie?
Yes, we have.
Yes. And I think that that's what God does in us, is he gives us the truths that are for us, that he wants us to have and to know. And it's beautiful to see her developing through this. And even as missions became an important piece for her. She was dealing with the inequities of women, as we've talked about earlier. But if you were in Hepzibah's shoes, would you have acquiesced to the custom of the day, or would you have been a rebel?
Rebel.
I knew you were going to say that, Paula. It takes strength of character, doesn't it, to say this is just not right, and I'm not going to tolerate that. Yeah.
You know, there's not an actual record of this, but I'm inclined to think that the Grimke sisters in Charleston two abolitionist sisters who saw their mother beat slaves that she owned. They became big abolitionists.
Hmm.
Their brother was Hepzibah's lawyer.
Mm.
And I've got to feel that some of the influence on her, how she felt about the institution of slavery, must have had influence.
Mm.
Family. I'm speculating. I don't know.
Mm.
Of course, when you write something, you have to do a lot more research than you put down on paper because you have to see the background. So I've really wondered about that.
Mm. That's
That influenced her.
good thought. Well, you know, she certainly took initiative. And when her husband refused to have offerings, she just said, I'm going to go build me some ovens and we're going to cook. I mean, I thought that was wonderful. And probably every wife has done something to be able to have that extra money to give to missions, over and above what maybe the family has decided, but they feel so compelled. We know that a lot of people had Lottie chickens and things like that over time. And I remember having the envelope system, and I would just tuck a few extra dollars in here and there for the things that I felt were even more important to me as a young woman on a very limited budget back in that day. But those tabby ovens, I'm so glad there are pictures of these things in the book, Rosalie, and you make them come alive. So we have the picture and we have that. But think of her gathering all those women together and them coming up with something they could do, something they could sell. I mean, they were entrepreneurs in a day when that word wasn't even known. They didn't have a lot of support either.
No.
So it was bits and pieces. Yet they set the mark high, didn't they? Does that inspire us as we go to our Women on Mission meetings, our WMU events, to say, these are something we can do this, we can do that. I'm preparing for the auction that we're going to have at the summit, and it's going to be called Cottage Creations. And so I hope that you will get some ideas from all the things they did so that you can bring something to the auction for our fundraiser at the summit. All those things that we can do in our home. And if you're not a crafter or creative that way, you'll go to a crafts show or and they're all starting up this fall, all those wonderful craft fairs, and you can find something maybe on the list of what those women were going to do, soaps and talcs and all those sorts of things that we gal like so much. I think a legacy is left in missions by her, and we've heard Rosalie speak to that. I know I need to get up there to Edisto, or down there to Edisto Island. It's on my do list, and I wish I'd known when you were going, Rosalie, and I would have joined you. But I think as you were writing that, I was traveling around for WMU and
In Africa, I think.
I think so too. I think I was. So but I hope that opportunity will come. I'll have to get my sister to go on a road trip with me. That would be great fun to do.
Good, love it.
So, yes. Well, what haven't we talked about that you all felt impressed you in this book? It's your turn to speak out.
I kind of feel like others need to talk because this is about the third or fourth time. I was impressed with the fact that she laid the groundwork for WMU, but it made me proud of my grandmother, mother, and aunts who all were WMU. I mean, one of my aunts, I think, held state offices in Oklahoma.
Neat.
But it made me proud to know that they were carrying on and making WMU strong. It makes me proud I'm carrying on through Baptist Nursing Fellowship and making WMU strong and keeping that going.
Thank you, Paula. Others?
Oh, this is off the subject, but where in Oklahoma are you from?
I am originally from Sherman, Texas.
Oh.
But I had an aunt that lived in Oklahoma that I would go and stay with during the summer.
That's neat. Yeah.
And
My
visit
My dad's from Oklahoma and I went to OBU. So I was
Okay.
checking you out.
Right. And it actually, one of Mother's aunts lived in Oklahoma. One of Dad's aunts lives in Oklahoma too. So,
How many of you all grew up with missions education in your churches? Well, I grew up in the Boston area, but we had missions education too. And it was much like what you all had as GAs. And that's why I think it was such a fit for me when I discovered Southern Baptist life, when we'd been married about 10 years. And I thought, this is like coming home, because there were no Swedish Baptist churches where we were living. And so it was, for me, a journey from a church that was spiraling away from the gospel and discovering the Southern Baptist Church, which was the first one in New England, the Screven Memorial, and to discover missions education there, find this whole new world of WMU all those years ago, and to be embracing it and it embracing me. But because I was raised in a missions environment, and because we had missionaries in our church and missionaries in our home, those things were what marked my growing up. And so back in that day, many of our evangelical denominations did have missions education, and it was significant in those days. I think WMU is the only women's organization in all the Baptists in North America that has missions education now for children, very specifically, which is sad to hear that that's not happening. Yeah. Other thoughts of how the book impressed you?
Debbie,
Yes.
thing that I always remember, I started talking to the girls at GA camp and then a lot of other places too. But the thing I always wanted people to know that I learned from her life is that one life can make a difference.
Right.
That's so true, Betty Lynn. Thank you. And we just never know who we are going to influence. One of my doctors who's been on mission trips with me, I had his girls in GA, and he was telling me that his oldest, who is now in med school, when she was a sixth grader, I took her and 4 others on a mission trip to Kentucky, where my sister was serving as a missionary. And that changed everything for her. In those 5 days, she said, because they're a very well-to-do family, she said, now I know God has given me so much so that I can help others. And last count, she'd been on 8 mission trips.
Whoa.
I believe that God will use her mightily in missions because she has a heart for that. And it's just wonderful. I was on a mission trip with another group of GAs, same place, Kentucky, in the mountains. And we were at the top of an outlook or a lookout over the valley where we were going to be ministering. And that was our first night there. And when we had our devotional time, when we got back, I said to the girls, well, you've seen all the places we're going to minister. What has impressed you the most? And one said, oh, where we're going to hand out clothing. And another said, oh, I want to cook meals and take them to people. And someone else couldn't wait to work in the food pantry. And then one little girl said, when we were looking out over the valley, I thought it was like when Jesus looked out over Jerusalem and he cried because people were lost. That's what God does when we prepare our children for missions. That's what God was doing in Hephzibah's life, was giving her opportunities, showing her things. And those are things you can't teach, but those are the experiences that God brings together. And he did for Hephzibah, and he's continuing to do it in our world today. Well, Rosalie, would you like to sum it up for us?
I think Hephzibah set the standard high to start with. And when I get discouraged because somebody always has something else to do rather than come to our meetings and do mission action, or I can't find anybody to help me with the GA group. And I'm getting on up there. I'm going to have somebody soon. I'm praying for that. I remember Hepzibah, and I think she never said, she didn't give up. She did not give up. She had that force of character. And I hope the Lord can keep us committed, even when we get discouraged. Now, this most recent book I've just done is Lottie Moon and the Silent Bell. And it's that name because it was written for older children. But 90% of those getting it, reading it are adults, because I think we're all children. And the force of character of that woman, who was born about the time that Hepzibah died, but they came that close together. The same force of character and dependency upon God that I have seen in her life. And I thought I knew Lottie, and I've researched her. I've done a monologue of her for 27 years now, but I learned new things about her heart and her spirit. And she had that same force of character and sense of justice and love for people that Hepzibah had. And that's what we all want to have. Recently, I was at a church in Huntsville, a large church in Huntsville, and I was doing Lottie Moon. I was dressed as Lottie, wig and all, but I was talking to the children about missions, and Miss Lottie was telling them stories. And a beautiful little girl came up to me, had red rimmed glasses on. She needed them to see, they weren't for play. And she came up and plucked on my sleeve and looked up at me and said, "Miss Moon, do you think I could be a missionary too?" And Miss Moon told her, "You surely could. You listen to God's voice." And Hepzibah listened to God's voice. And I hope we do. I try to every day.
Well, Rosalie, it's been such a treat having you. It was a bit last minute asking Rosalie to join us, but let's all give Rosalie a hand for sharing her passion with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's been a good evening, good discussion of a life that was well led. And who knows, someday a biographer is going to be writing about some of you, maybe. Definitely about Rosalie and all her
That's scary. That's scary.
It's scary. Oh, goodness. Well, our next meeting is December 5th, and we're going to be looking at the Speckled Monster. So I hope that you'll all get that book. It's available on Amazon and Goodreads and some of the other places that we can find books. So hope you will enjoy that, and we'll look forward to meeting together then. If you can be at the summit, come to the summit. It's going to be wonderful. And Marilyn will be there to greet you and hug you and make sure that it's the best summit yet. So look forward to seeing you all in person there, I hope. So God bless you and thank you for being here. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Rosalie.
Good night. Thank you, Rosalie.
You bless me. Thank you.
Rosalie, my aunt lived in Okemah, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I had to think about that. It's
Rita and Muskogee.
Well, you weren't far from her, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. That's neat.
Yeah. The other aunt is still living and lives in Comanche, Oklahoma, which is west of Oklahoma City, and I think it's south, but it's pretty much straight across from Oklahoma City. Love visiting, and I want to come out there soon.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
God bless.